Hi, everybody. My name's Abby Tavilos, and welcome back to the Simply Scrupulosity podcast. I am your host, and today's episode 31. Woohoo! I'm super happy about that. I think today I'm ready to just kind of go back to the basics a little bit. My very first ever podcast episode, almost a year and a half ago now, was simply just titled, "What is OCD?" And to this day, it is my most listened to episode. And because over the past year and a half, my discourse and channel has kind of shifted a little bit to be more Scrupulosity OCD focused, I thought today we could take a little spin on that popular episode and answer the question, what is Scrupulosity OCD? And I think this is helpful for a multitude of reasons, just because a lot of people don't know what it is. And also, I guess kind of my vision for this episode is that people who have Scrupulosity OCD, who find it very difficult to explain to loved ones what it is, you're not alone, I've been there, can use this as a little bit of a resource and just kind of a neutral, educational, what is Scrupulosity OCD? What, on a very basic level, am I experiencing on a day-to-day basis? And if you are somebody who listens to every single episode of the podcast, first of all, thank you so much. Second of all, I know you know what I'm about to say because in most of my episodes, the OCD cycle comes up because you can't really talk about OCD or what is OCD or how to treat OCD or whatever without acknowledging the OCD cycle, because that is the most basic definition of what OCD is. So before I jump into that, I also did want to just give a little bit of a brief intro in saying, if you Google what is Scrupulosity OCD, it's not necessarily gonna explicitly detail the OCD cycle, which is why I wanted to have this episode, but it will tell you something along the lines of, I mean, should I just read it? I don't know. I feel like I've Googled it enough times, but it will tell you something along the lines of when someone is obsessed and distressed about matters of religion or morality. And I think that's an important differentiation to make, because not everyone who has Scrupulosity OCD is necessarily religious, and they can have Scrupulosity OCD and simply be concerned with matters of being a good person without necessarily having God and religion be involved. So both are Scrupulosity OCD, either or both, whatever one. It is at its barest bones when somebody is obsessive and compulsive about morality or religion. And what I mean by the obsessive and compulsive nature of Scrupulosity OCD is the OCD cycle. There's essentially 4 steps to the cycle, and I'm going to give hopefully the perfect amount of detail when I go into this, enough that it's very clear, but not too much that it's getting muddied or like a bombardment of information. Because like I said, I'm imagining people listening to this who maybe are just getting diagnosed with it, or who are family members, and this is their way to kind of learn what is going on with their loved one. So the first step in the OCD cycle is an intrusive thought. And I'm sure you've heard this statement before, especially if you are particularly active on social media, just because people say, I let the intrusive thoughts win all the time. No, that's not necessarily what an intrusive thought is, or the right context. Those are technically impulsive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are, of course, by nature intrusive. They're unwanted, they're persistent, and they often center around uncertainty and fear of that uncertainty. Some examples of intrusive thoughts for somebody with scrupulosity OCD could be, is my faith strong enough / my faith isn't strong enough? Did God really forgive me for that sin? Did I offend that person, or I offended that person? And so they almost pose a question, an unanswerable question, a question that you can't prove to the OCD sufferer, which is why they're so sticky and why they can keep coming back, which I will get into a little bit later. It's also important to note that these intrusive thoughts are often referred to as what we call ego dystonic, which means they usually go directly against the essence of the person with OCD. It doesn't reflect their character or their own morality or really anything about them. And this is especially important when we get into intrusive thoughts that center around topics like accidentally harming somebody in any type of way, because that doesn't mean that the person with OCD wants to harm somebody. And that's important differentiation. At the same time, though, they can also reflect what the person with OCD really cares about. So, for example, with scrupulosity OCD, obviously, these people value being a good person or their faith or what have you, or not hurting people, because they're obsessive and compulsive about it. And so with all of that information in mind, knowing what an intrusive thought is, the second step of the OCD cycle is a spike in anxiety. This anxiety is intense, and it also is often such a large part of the OCD sufferer's life that it's almost unconscious. I didn't even know I struggled with anxiety till after I got diagnosed with OCD, because I just thought it was my personality in my life. But it can be hard to pinpoint this thought caused me to feel this way, because it's so automatic. But as you work with your therapist and continue to move towards recovery, you can realize and reveal, okay, this is what actually happened. And everybody feels anxiety differently. Me personally, I would have heart palpitations, struggled to catch my breath, like I feel like bricks were on my chest, a lot of tension headaches, buzzing fingertips, those types of things. I could name a million. And so you've got the thought, you got the anxiety, and the third step is a compulsion. And I think that for many people, understanding what a compulsion is often the most difficult part, because most people have some working knowledge of hand washing or locking doors or checking that the stove is off. But when it gets to something like scrupulosity, it's like, what's the compulsion? And essentially, a compulsion is anything that an OCD sufferer does under the impression that if I just do this one thing, my anxiety will go away and my question will be answered that was posed by the intrusive thought, or I'll prove the intrusive thought wrong. And so with scrupulosity OCD, we're talking things like confessing sins to religious leaders or people that they believe they may have harmed. Prayer can be a compulsion. Scripture reading can be a compulsion. Going to church can be a compulsion. Asking for reassurance is a big one. Journaling, making lists, ruminating. These are some of the most common. And so if we kind of rewind a little bit, say this person's OCD cycle starts with the intrusive thought of God didn't forgive me for that sin. They start to feel anxious, and then they think, oh, well, if I just confess to my bishop, I can be sure God forgave me for that sin. And it could be them confessing doing something like accidentally turning the radio station to a station that had an inappropriate song. Like, they're typically not sins people without OCD would even consider confessing. So those are the first 3 steps. The 4th step is a temporary reduction in anxiety. And the key word here is temporary, because say I confess to my bishop, I did the compulsion of saying I accidentally listened to this inappropriate song, or I didn't leave when this inappropriate song came on. I'll feel better afterwards and be like, oh my gosh, God probably forgave me now. But maybe 5 minutes later, I'm going to worry, oh, but I left out this one detail when I was confessing to my bishop. So I didn't confess right. So God still hasn't forgiven me. And so that's what I mean when I said intrusive thoughts typically surround unanswerable questions, because there's this inherent inability to prove that God has forgiven you, literally. So you can go around and you can have OCD cycles about the same exact thought 20 million times a day, or they can be different things. They can be multiple things going on. But at its root, when someone says, I have scrupulosity OCD, what they mean is they are experiencing these 4 steps on a loop, continuously, repetitively, spending hours a day, going through the cycle. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's hard to disentangle and recognize and name what's going on. Yes, it takes work to recover from. But as a loved one who may know someone with scrupulosity OCD, it can be so helpful to have this basic understanding of the OCD cycle, because number 1, then you can, if they're anxious, maybe help them identify the intrusive thought that preceded the anxiety, because sometimes it's hard to recognize. And B, you can know what the compulsions are. So if they're coming to you and asking reassurance from you, like, do you think it's okay I didn't go to church today? Or do you think I need to apologize to this person? You know that's a compulsion. So you can therefore not feed into the OCD cycle. You can not give them reassurance, and you can respond by saying, maybe you offended them. It's hard to know. You can help them sit with the uncertainty without worsening the OCD cycle. And if my husband were here, he would agree that that was the most helpful thing he could have done in my healing journey, was to know how my OCD works. And he helped me so many times identify intrusive thoughts, avoid doing compulsion. And he also helped me sit in the anxiety when I didn't do a compulsion. Because that's the other piece to this, is you've got these 4 steps, and the gold standard for OCD recovery is called exposure and response prevention therapy, or ERP, which means you take away the 3rd step of the cycle, which is the compulsion, which therefore means you never get the reduction of anxiety. So healing from OCD looks like getting thoughts and being anxious, and being anxious and being anxious and being anxious, and not coping with the anxiety by doing a compulsion. So recovery can be very difficult for that reason, because suddenly it feels like you're drowning in anxiety all the time. And so having a support system to help you be in that anxiety while you're resisting compulsions is so helpful. And so that being said, this cycle, these 4 steps, is what differentiates somebody who has generalized anxiety or persistent worries from somebody who has OCD. The diagnosis therefore opens a door to receiving the right treatment, because somebody with generalized anxiety, they're not looking at compulsions, and the only way to get better from OCD is by stopping the compulsions. And so you won't get better without the right diagnosis, which is why OCD is not classified as an anxiety disorder. It's its own thing, because it has that extra component and extra layer of, okay, this is how we get better. And I will mention, for me, I obviously started with ERP, and then I also, after that, I did what's called ICBT, which stands for Inferential Cognitive Based Therapy. And that one, so we're going back to those 4 steps, rather than focusing on not doing a compulsion, it focuses on helping you go back to step one and getting the intrusive thought and then stopping in your tracks, and then hopefully getting the OCD sufferer to a place where these thoughts aren't bringing up such intense anxiety. And so for me, doing both of those therapies gave me a more rounded and balanced idea of what OCD is, how it works, helped me practice identifying intrusive thoughts, and both of those combined plus medication is what helped me recover. And from my diagnosis to my recovery was almost 2 years. And so it takes a lot of patience and work and exhaustion and support, but it's possible to recover from scrupulosity OCD. And I think the next question when I start talking about, I've explained OCD, I've explained the treatment, I say it's possible to recover. A lot of people are like, okay, but what does recovery look like? Because anyone will really tell you that OCD is a chronic condition. And so it's not curable. It won't go away. And what that means is you can't stop intrusive thoughts. You can't be cured of intrusive thoughts and anxiety. So I am in OCD recovery because the amount of time I spend doing compulsions and being debilitated by anxiety is under a certain threshold. I still get intrusive thoughts, but I just kind of get them and I'm like, cool, I've gotten that before. For the most part, right? Like my husband will tell you now, I'm in recovery, but maybe once or twice a month, I still get sucked into the OCD cycle. But the difference is when you're in recovery, it's not so debilitating and exhausting. It's just kind of a small part of your life rather than being your whole life. And so that's a good way to kind of extend hope to people with scrupulosity OCD, is that this feels like it's everything right now, but it's not always going to be. And the last thing I wanted to mention as part of this episode, I wanted it to be short and sweet on purpose. But the last thing I wanted to mention was there is a lot of nuance when it comes to scrupulosity OCD for the sufferer and for loved ones, because sometimes when the person is doing ERP or in treatment, they are asked to do things like don't repent or don't go to church this week, even though you're not sick, or go one day without saying a prayer, or move into a place where you're not sure if your faith is strong enough, or you're not 100% certain what you believe. And in some religions and spaces, those thoughts and ways of living are not correct. And the person may fear for the person's salvation, or be afraid that they're just going to leave the church, or XYZ. And there's so much fear, not only for loved ones, but especially for the people who actually have OCD, because I promise you they're thinking those same exact things. And just the judgment and misunderstanding. I just want to be a little bit bold and say, if you are a loved one of someone with scrupulosity OCD, besides supporting them and helping them not do compulsions and being with them in the anxiety sometimes, the best thing you can do besides that is not express your own fear, judgments, or concerns about any of those things. Because what's most important is not them living the religion how the religion says it should be, or how you think it should be, or whatever. The most important thing is that they get their life back from this disease. And that can be hard on multiple fronts. And I'm acknowledging that. But the most beautiful thing you can do is try to come to a place of love and understanding and a gray area, and move away from black and white thinking and give them the space to change how they need to change. I'm not saying you get a scrupulosity OCD diagnosis, the only way to heal is to not be religious. That's the last thing I'm saying. What I am saying is that it may be crazy to see, like, this person, religion was everything to them, and now it's finally not everything. So maybe they're not doing things as intensely, or maybe they don't have so much weight on being certain and knowing something is true. And that can be jarring and hard for both parties. But giving them space to heal without your judgment and fear and all of that extra baggage is the most beautiful gift that you can give. And it will just help so much, because at the end of the day, it's you also practicing the uncertainty, because that fear you might feel for their salvation, that's the fear they've lived with every day of their life. And now they're learning to sit with uncertainty, and they may be asking you to do that as well. I'm not saying they certainly will, but if that's the case, I just wanted to make space for that experience as well. Because at the end of the day, Scrupulosity OCD is a serious disorder. It's debilitating. It impacts lives more than I can say. It impacted my life more than I can say. And being healed and entering recovery and doing the hard work to get there was the best thing I ever did for myself. And I couldn't have done it without people in my life who loved and accepted me when I was unrecognizable at times. And they had faith I would come out on the other side, and I did. Am I the same person? No, but I did. That's on purpose. Healing means change. You're not supposed to keep doing the exact same things. And your patience and understanding and willingness to learn about the disorder, that's already so much and means so much. And so no matter where you are or why you tuned into this What is Scrupulosity OCD podcast, thank you for tuning in. And if there's anything you would add to this, please feel free to comment and share your thoughts, because I think it's important that all experiences are acknowledged and validated. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode next week.